Good afternoon. Welcome to The Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to Bangladesh, as India imposed curbs upon exports from Bangladesh to northeast India and overseas through India's land ports. It is seen as a reciprocal move to Bangladesh imposing non-tariff barriers upon imports from India. The second article is related to declining fertility rate in India as observed by the Sample Registration System Statistical Report of 2021. Additionally, we'll take up 5 articles in the simplified which will help you in your prelims and mains preparation. Now, the first article is related to Bangladesh. Dhaka has been imposing non-tariff barriers upon the imports from India. In a reciprocal move now, India has also imposed the curbs upon the exports from Bangladesh to India's northeast region and the other overseas regions through India's land ports. There will be some exemptions. For example, the items like fish, edible oil, LPG will not be having any restrictions for imports from Bangladesh. So we will discuss the emerging concerns between India-Bangladesh relations, the significance of Bangladesh for India, and the solutions for these concerns. This is important in GS2 under the topic India and its neighborhood relations. Ever since the exit of Sheikh Hasina government in Bangladesh, when the new regime came into power, the ties between India and Bangladesh have been under the strain. There have been adverse remarks from the side of Bangladesh. For example, the Bangladesh chief advisor Yunus's aide even commented that Bangladesh should occupy the northeast states of India in case India attacks Pakistan. Plus, the interim government in Bangladesh has been sympathetic towards the Islamic radicals in Bangladesh. Post August 2024, when the regime change happened, there has been the news of the escaping and the release of various radicals from the jails in Bangladesh. For example, the Ansarullah Bangla team chief Mufti Jashimuddin Rahmani. Likewise, the Jamaat-ul Mujahideen Bangladesh has been strengthening ties with the Hifazat-e-Islami in Bangladesh, both radical groups in Bangladesh. The Jamaat-e-Islami in Bangladesh has been pushing for the establishment of an Islamic state itself in Bangladesh. The Hizb ut-Tahrir has been organizing pro-caliphate rallies in Bangladesh openly. This is happening right under the nose of the interim government in Bangladesh. So it has the tacit support from the interim government in Bangladesh. The Hizb ut-Tahrir has been recruiting youth from India also. Not only from the border state of West Bengal, but also even from Delhi, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, etc. They have been recruiting educated youth from India for radicalizing them and using them for anti-India operations. And there has been a revival of the Al-Qaeda linked Harkat-ul-Jihad al-Islami Bangladesh also. They have been infiltrating the Qaumi madrasas in Bangladesh again for the radicalization, for the spreading of Islamic propaganda and anti-India propaganda in Bangladesh. So they have been exploiting the border regions of India. The border regions is more vulnerable in India because of the exploitation by the radical Islamic outfits as well as the criminal networks which resort to drug trafficking, human trafficking, etc. And they have been engaging in the Salafist activities also. The Salafism is a sect within Sunni Islam which is more orthodox, which is more fundamentalist, and it practices the early practices of the Muslims which are more fundamental. And the Bangladeshi preachers, they have been going for the religious discourses in the border districts near the West Bengal region. For example, the regions near Malda, Murshidabad, North 24, Pragnas district, etc. And there have been ethnic and linguistic similarities between the regions of West Bengal in India and Bangladesh, and it has aided the infiltration from the side of Bangladesh. There is illegal migration also which happens in the region. It changes the demography of the border regions in India. For example, the states in Assam, Tripura and West Bengal especially are affected due to the changing demography because of the illegal migration from the side of Bangladesh. And there is the prevalence of extremist Bengali literature also, which is being spread on the social media. There is news that the Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh and the Ansarullah Bangla team terror modules which were neutralized, they are becoming active once more. Plus, even the insurgent groups of India, for example, the United Liberation Front of Assam, the National Democratic Front of Bodoland, they have been setting up camps in Bangladesh, seeking refuge over there. There are other concerns also regarding India-Bangladesh relations. For example, there is the problem of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. There are about 13 lakh Rohingyas in Bangladesh and they are vulnerable to radicalization. The Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, they have been promoting the anti-India activities and engaging the Rohingyas there. And there have been infiltration attempts from the side of the Rohingyas also from Bangladesh into India once they were displaced from Myanmar. The Chittagong Hill Tracts region, that is a hub for promoting ethnic conflicts in India, for promoting demographic changes into India, because it serves as a potential base for the Indian insurgent groups. The insurgent groups in India which are banned in India and which have been displaced from Myanmar, they are seeking refuge in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. Likewise, there have been attacks on the minorities in Bangladesh. The attacks on religious minorities, the Hindus in Bangladesh especially, although it has been denied by the interim government in Bangladesh. Also, there has been an increasing Pakistani footprint in Bangladesh. The influence of Pakistan has been increasing there. The ties have strengthened ever since the regime change, and there have been the visit by the side of the military delegations and the ISI delegations from Pakistan. They have been visiting the sensitive border areas in Bangladesh. They have even resumed direct trade in the Pakistan and Bangladesh after 1971. The ISI, the agency of Pakistan, has been aiding the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed Bangladesh and the Harkatul Jihad al-Islami in Bangladesh to support anti-India activities. Pakistan has been promoting the Islamic identity in the Bangladeshi politics also. Another concern is the involvement of China in Bangladesh. Bangladesh has even invited China to revive the Lal Monir Hat air base there. And now there are fears in the defense circles that what if Chinese fighter jets are deployed in the region by Bangladesh? And there is a concern related to the Siliguri corridor as well. The Siliguri corridor serves as India's chicken's neck. It provides the land connectivity to India's northeast region, and Bangladesh has been making adverse remarks regarding India's Seven Sisters, the northeast region. Bangladesh has also misread the maritime geography. They have been claiming that Dhaka is the guardian of the ocean in the region. But they fail to realize that India has a long maritime boundary along the Bay of Bengal region. And India has the access to not only the Kolkata port but also the Sitwe port in Myanmar. Plus the regional sea trade routes, they are not exclusive, they are shared. And there have been the historical disputes between India and Bangladesh, for example, the sharing of river waters, the transboundary river water sharing, for example, the Teesta river water dispute, and the smuggling, trafficking, and the infiltration attempts from the side of Bangladesh into India. Now, why is Bangladesh significant for us? Why do we need cooperation from the side of Bangladesh? Bangladesh's cooperation will help in the success of India's neighborhood first policy. It is our right next door neighbor. Geostrategically looking, we need its cooperation for ensuring regional stability, for ensuring peace in the region. We do not want to spend too much on defense. We want to experience economic growth. We want to utilize our demographic dividend effectively. For that, there should be peace in the region, and we need cooperation for the regional blocs also. For the success of the blocs like BIMSTEC, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal corridor, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, we need cooperation. Geopolitically, Bangladesh is important for us so that we are able to collaborate to counter terrorism, to ensure border security, to check illegal migration, to check infiltration attempts, also to get the permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. We need one more vote from Bangladesh. Geoeconomically looking, it is important for us as we export pharma products to Bangladesh. We import textiles from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh lies on their trade route from India to Southeast Asia. And Bangladesh is also India's fifth largest export destination as of 2022-2023. And within South Asia, Bangladesh is India's biggest trade partner. When we look at the connectivity aspect, we need connectivity to our northeast region. For that, Bangladesh can help us. For example, the development of Akhora-Agartala rail link. Likewise, the two countries have had in place the protocol on inland water trade and transit that will ensure the smooth movement of the goods on vessels through the rivers in Bangladesh. It is important to ensure the securing of sea lanes of communication. For that, cooperation is needed. And since 1972, there has been the India-Bangladesh Protocol route in place. This route allows the transit of the goods vessels through specific routes. For example, as you can see, there are the Protocol Route 1 and 2 shown in the map. The defense exercises are also conducted between the two countries. For example, exercises Sampriti between the armies of the two countries and exercise Bongo Sagar between the navies of India and Bangladesh. The two countries have cultural ties as well. For example, the celebration of festivals like Durga Puja, the common language, for example, music, drama, etc. Now, what can be the suggestions to improve the bilateral ties between India and Bangladesh? One, we can support the popular expression in Bangladesh. We have goodwill among the Bangladeshi people. We have supported the development, the economic development, the political development of Bangladesh since the last 5 decades, ever since the liberation of Bangladesh. Now we need to ensure that the misinformation, the disinformation, the fake news, the anti-India propaganda, the anti-India rhetoric is countered. At the same time, we can support the popular mandate just like we did in Nepal. In Nepal in 2006, there was a people's movement against the monarchical dictatorial rule, and India helped in the establishment of a multi-party democracy there at that time. And the bilateral ties between India and Bangladesh, they should be expanded for national interest. For that, we can adopt a wait and watch strategy. At the same time, we can keep on countering the negative perception which is being spread about India in Bangladesh. Also, we need to avoid the rhetorics, just like we did in the case of Maldives. In Maldives, President Mohammad Muizzu came into power, and it was seen to be anti-India as there were links with the India Out campaign regarding the regime which came into power in Maldives. Also, we can go for the connectivity initiatives, for example, the Digital Connectivity Corridor. We can explore the conclusion of the Free Trade Agreement or the CEPA, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. The CEPA was being explored before the regime change happened in 2024. We can establish a joint task force and go for the smart border management first, which is one of the major concerns between India and Bangladesh because of the border vulnerabilities and the infiltration attempts. We can go for the geopolitical maneuvering. For example, we can collaborate with the Western nations like the USA, the UK, as well as the European Union to counter the China-Pakistan axis from influencing Bangladesh too much. And we can seek the support from the Gulf nations, for example, the Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, to counter the extremism which is being spread in Bangladesh and which is getting support from Pakistan. And we can seek to resolve the outstanding issues. The outstanding issues, for example, the water sharing disputes, the Rohingya refugees, etc., they should be solved as soon as possible. And we can go for the building of India-Bangladesh Friendship Pipeline. Through this pipeline, we'll be able to send high-speed diesel to Bangladesh, and it will improve the ties between the two countries. Now there is a mains practice question also. Examine the significance of India-Bangladesh bilateral ties in the regional context. What are the key challenges facing the relationship today? Suggest a multi-pronged strategy to strengthen the mutual trust and cooperation between the two countries. Please try to write it. Now the next article is related to the declining fertility rate in India. The context behind it is the Sample Registration System Statistical Report of 2021, which has highlighted that the fertility rate in India has been declining, but there have been some regional variations also. So we will discuss the factors, the reasons behind the decline in fertility rate in India and the steps that the government has taken in this regard. This is important in GS1 under the topic population and the associated issues. First, let's discuss a few fertility indicators and their definitions. One of the foremost fertility indicator that is often used is the total fertility rate. The total fertility rate refers to the average number of children that are born per woman in an economy. The women in the reproductive age, that is from 15 years to 49 years of age. The crude birth rate refers to the number of live births that happen per 1000 population. In India, it was at 19.3 in 2021 and it has been declining annually at 1.12% since 2016. The general fertility rate refers to the number of live births that happen per 1000 women. The gross reproduction rate refers to the expected number of daughters that are given birth to per woman. The replacement level total fertility rate is considered to be 2.1. That is, it will be able to sustain the population. It will neither increase the population nor will it decrease the population. Now when we look at the trend among the total fertility rate, it has been stable at 2. It is the same as 2020. There are regional variations. For example, Bihar has the highest total fertility rate at 3. West Bengal and Delhi have the lowest at about 1.4 only. That is way below the replacement level of 2.1. 6 states have exceeded the replacement levels. The replacement level of 2.1, that is Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. The total fertility rate has been declining continuously from 2009 to 2021. There have been some regional variations among the decline. For example, the fastest crude birth rate decline has happened in Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Delhi. It has happened at twice the national rate. When we look at the crude birth rate specifically, Uttarakhand is the only state which has experienced the increase in the crude birth rate from 2016 to 2021 as per the report. Now, what are the factors behind the decline in the fertility rates in India? One of the foremost factors was the step taken by the government to control the birth rates in India. We went for the family planning programs and it led to the increase in the adoption of the modern contraceptives. When we look at the usage of the modern contraceptives, this was just 14% in 1970. It increased to 56% in 2020. 56% of the people use the modern contraceptives. When we look at the declining fertility, another factor is the women empowerment. As the female literacy improves, the birth rates decline. The empirical data indicates that women who have had the education up to the secondary level or higher than that have the total fertility rate of just 1.7. Whereas the women with no education at all, their total fertility rate is around 2.6, that is more than replacement level. Likewise, the participation of women among the workforce has also contributed to the decline in the fertility levels. For example, there is the increase in the DINK families. This is the new age lingo which is being used now. That is dual income, no kids families. They have been growing annually at the rate of 30%. The urban total fertility rate is 1.6, whereas the rural total fertility rate is 2.1. There is a correlation with the workforce participation. In the urban areas, the women are involved more in the workforce. Therefore, we can say that there is a correlation that with women empowerment, there has been a preference towards smaller families and less reproduction. The Social attitudes have also contributed to the decline in the fertility rate. For example, the emphasis upon the career, the emphasis upon the financial independence, and the preference for smaller families. The health indicators have improved. The improvement in health indicators have also contributed to the decline in the fertility rate. For example, the infant mortality rate, it was at 80 per 1000 live births in 1990. This declined to 28 in 2020. Life expectancy likewise has increased. In 1960 it was just 41, now it has increased to 69 in 2020. Plus, the child rearing economics also dissuades people from giving birth to more babies. For example, the urbanization, the high child rearing cost, and the high cost of living in general, they dissuade people from giving birth to more children. Plus, another factor is the out migration. There have been the increasing instances of youth migrating abroad, the educated youth in particular migrating abroad and starting their families over there. This has also led to the decline in the fertility rates in India. Now, what has the government done to ensure that we achieve the total fertility rate of 2.1? The government steps till now have been majorly focused upon the controlling of the population explosion, the bringing down of the total fertility rate. For example, we went for the National Population Policy, which was instituted in 2000. The stated goal of that was to attain the total fertility rate of 2.1 among the population by 2010 and then stabilize the population by 2045. The government came up with the Mission Parivar Vikas. Through the Mission Parivar Vikas, there was the promotion of the contraceptive access and the promotion of the contraceptive use in the high fertility districts. 146 districts were identified specifically. There was the distribution of the Nai Pehel kits, the contraceptive kits, as well as the holding of the Saas Bahu Sammelans under the Mission Parivar Vikas. There was also counseling which was provided through the Sarthi vans under the Mission Parivar Vikas to ensure that people do not give too many births or they go for spacing between the births, that is the spacing between first childbirth and the second childbirth. The National Family Planning Indemnity Scheme provided for insurance, the insurance against the death, complications or failure if a person goes for sterilization. The strategies were adopted by the Jansankhya Sthirta Kosh. Within the Jansankhya Sthirta Kosh, that is the Population Stabilization Fund, Prerna strategy promoted the delayed marriages, promoted the delayed first childbirth and encouraged the spacing between the childbirths. The Santushti strategy promoted the involvement of the private sector gynecologists and vasectomy surgeons and encouraged them to perform the surgeries in the PPP mode, public-private sector participation mode. The National Health Mission provided for the family planning services. But again, these initiatives were focused upon bringing down the total fertility rate. There was the home delivery of contraceptives also, which was done by the ASHA workers. The contraceptive choices also increased. The newer contraceptives came into picture and they were promoted by the government. For example, the injectable contraceptives, the progesterone only pills. There was also the institution of a 360-degree media campaign from the side of the government through TV channels, radio channels, as well as the newspaper advertisement campaigns, etc., to ensure that we are able to achieve the total fertility rate of 2.1, that is the replacement level. Now, there is a mains practice question also. Examine the socio-economic and cultural reasons behind the decline in the total fertility rate in India. Also discuss the government initiatives for family planning and population stabilization undertaken. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to the countering of disinformation and managing global perceptions. This is in the context of India-Pakistan conflict and important in GS2 under the topic India and its neighborhood relations. Whenever there is a conflict in the time of a war, the first casualty is the truth, as observed by Philip Knightley. So we need to counter the disinformation, the propaganda, the anti-India narrative being spread by not only Pakistan but also its allies like China and Turkey. Pakistan spreads fake news, disinformation through multiple channels. For example, the newspapers Dawn, Daily Times, Geo News, etc. and various forums like Pakistan Strategic Forum. They spread propaganda. For example, they damaged Indian air bases, which was not true. They captured an Indian pilot, which was not true. They shot down allegedly the US made fighter jets by using their own Chinese made fighter jets. Likewise, China also resorts to the propaganda and disinformation, for example, through its Global Times, Jinhua News, etc. And the trolls of the Chinese Communist Party, they are functioning as keyboard warriors. Likewise, Turkey got involved and they also contributed through their troll forms, the Anadolu Agency, various think tanks and NGOs to set an anti-India narrative. When it comes to the disinformation against India in the international media, we can observe the authors of international media who wrote the articles on the India-Pakistan conflict. They were mostly of the Pakistan nationality. For example, the CNN news network, which is especially functioning as a disinformation hub against India. And this disinformation campaign did not happen for the first time during the India-Pakistan conflict. It has been happening across various wars. For example, Russia-Ukraine war, there also various fake news propaganda was spread. Like Russia went for the doppelganger operation. This was the operation in which various fake news websites were set up. The fake news websites which were imitating the popular news agencies of the West, for example, the Washington Post, Fox News, etc. And through these fake news websites, they were spreading fake news and propaganda to sow mistrust, to ensure that the Ukraine is not able to get enough support from the Western nations. There was even an allegation that Ukraine is operating a bioweapons lab which is funded by USA. It also turned out to be a hoax. Ukraine also went for the propaganda warfare. For example, they spread their own theory of the Ghost of the Kiev. The Ghost of the Kiev was the mythical Ukrainian pilot who shot down multiple Russian fighter aircrafts. It turned out that it was not true at all, and this was just a story to boost the morale of the Ukrainian soldiers. Likewise, earlier during the Vietnam War, the USA fabricated the narratives. The narrative regarding the Gulf of Tonkin, it was alleged that the US destroyers, they were attacked by the North Vietnamese patrol boats, which was not true. Likewise, the USA lied regarding the body counts to spread the narrative that they are winning the war. Even during the World War I, there was the propaganda warfare. For example, it was alleged that the Germans were committing atrocities. There was fake news regarding this, that the German soldiers, they were bayoneting babies, etc. So why do we need to counter this disinformation and why do we need to control the narrative now? Because it is important for the national security. It is important for internal stability. Because disinformation can cause panic, it can cause mistrust. The psychological operations, the psyops warfare can also bring down the morale of the public. Hence, it is important to counter the disinformation. It is important for ensuring diplomatic relations and building the international perception, because Pakistan wants to portray India as the aggressor and it wants to gain the international sympathy. So it is part of the strategic narrative, and that strategic narrative has to be controlled and the international perception has to be managed. Also, there are technological advancements in disinformation. For example, the usage of the AI generated deep fakes, and the cyber security threats and espionage also happen, because the disinformation campaigns, they serve as a cover for the espionage activities. For example, recently only there was an arrest of various YouTubers. One YouTuber from Haryana also arrested for the espionage activities, and it has the economic implications also. The disinformation campaigns, they can impact the markets adversely, they can impact the investor confidence, which can lead to the outflow of the foreign direct investments, the foreign institutional investments, etc. So what has India done? We can observe that there are 5 pillars upon which New Delhi's communication strategy is based now. One, we responded quickly, speed. Because in the attention economy, if you are not the first, you will be forgotten. Even if you go for the counter allegations or the debunking of the claims, it is not likely to go viral. Therefore, the Ministry of External Affairs officials, they conducted press briefings regularly. And we also went for symbolism. The Operation Sindoor, the name Sindoor, it evoked cultural resonance. At the same time, we were able to portray Pakistan as the terror heaven. And we suppressed the disinformation simultaneously. For example, we had to impose the internet shutdown in parts of Kashmir to curb the spread of propaganda during the Operation Sindoor. We went for digital diplomacy, for example, the outreach to various agencies, organizations, and nations through the social media platforms, X, etc. We are going for outreach also. During that time, we briefed the United Nations Security Council members, and now we are going for the all party delegations. We are sending the all party delegations to spread the message from India. Now, the next article is related to the United Nations Peacekeeping Mission. This is important in GS2 under the topic Important International Institutions, Agencies and Fora, their structure and mandate. Before coming to the article, let's discuss the role of the United Nations peacekeeping missions. The role of the mission is to ensure peace and security in the region wherever the blue helmets are deployed. It facilitates the political process. It facilitates the holding of elections in that region, the restoration towards democracy. It also protects the civilians. It promotes and protects the human rights also. It assists in the disarmament, the reintegration of the former rebels, the former combatants, and it ensures the restoration, it aids in the restoration of the rule of law. It functions on three principles chiefly. The United Nations peacekeeping soldiers, they are deployed upon the consent of the parties. They function on the principle of impartiality. They do not take sides, they are unbiased, and they do not go for the usage of force except for self-defense. India has been one of the biggest contributors for the UN peacekeeping operations. India is now fourth largest contributor to the UN peacekeeping operations. When we look at the legacy of India in UN peacekeeping, we have contributed now 5,375 soldiers. They have made supreme sacrifices also. 160 Indian soldiers have been martyred during the UN peacekeeping operations. The key contributions that India makes is we provide them the agile units, the training, the logistics, the gender parity as well as the technological support. And we also provide the veterinary detachments. For example, India's contribution in the veterinary sector has been particularly praised for the improvement in livestock health in Sudan. We also go for the capacity building and training for the UN peacekeeping soldiers. We have the Center for UN Peacekeeping, which is there in Delhi, and it trains the troops and it conducts the international courses regarding the peacekeeping also. Regarding the United Nations gender parity drive, there are some initiatives taken up by India, which include the female engagement teams in Congo and Abyei, and the women military police in the Golan Heights and the observers there. And Major Radhika Sen was even awarded the United Nations Military Gender Advocate of the Year 2023. Now coming to the article, India has pledged one quick reaction force company, one male armed police or mixed armed police unit, one women-led police unit, one counter-explosive ordnance disposal unit, that is IED unit, one K9 unit and a SWAT police unit for UN peacekeeping operations. In addition to these uniformed capabilities, India has also pledged the peacekeeping training capacity building, which will include the UN pre-deployment training of trainers course and UN military observers course, the UN contingent commanders course, a UN female military officers course, and the international courses by the UN CivPol, that is UN Civilian Police Component Center. Now, the next article is related to the boycotting of Turkey and Azerbaijan and the remarks made by the Vice President of India, who has observed that we can't help the economy of the nations who are against us. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests. First, let's discuss regarding Turkey. The Turkey has interests in Pakistan. Both share the historical and ideological ties. Both share the Islamic identity. They have been the allies ever since the time of the Cold War. Both were part of the CENTO, the Central Treaty Organization. And Turkey also gets the backing of Pakistan regarding Cyprus. Pakistan backed Turkey during the Cyprus conflict, and Erdogan's Islamism also gets the support from Pakistan. Likewise, there is high-level engagement between Turkey and Pakistan. The Turkish President Erdogan visited Pakistan more than 10 times since 2003. Erdogan also co-chaired the Strategic Council meeting held in February 2025 between the two countries. Also, Turkey seeks the support of Pakistan to balance the Gulf powers. For example, it competes with Saudi Arabia and UAE for the influence, for expanding its influence in the Muslim world. Therefore, it seeks alliance with Pakistan and Malaysia. Therefore, it conducted the Kuala Lumpur summit, which was again a challenge to Saudi Arabia. It also wants Pakistan for the expansion in the Indian Ocean region. In the Indian Ocean region, Turkey has established its largest overseas base in Somalia in 2017. It has sold the drones to Maldives, now to Pakistan also. It has been conducting frequent naval drills with Pakistan. Now, what are Pakistan's interests in Turkey? Pakistan also needs Turkey. For example, Turkey backs it regarding the Kashmir narrative that Pakistan spreads. For example, Erdogan commenting in 2025 regarding the Kashmiri brothers. Pakistan seeks defense cooperation also from Turkey. Turkey is the second largest arms supplier for Pakistan, the largest being China, and it purchases the Turkish drones, missiles and submarines. It gets support in the form of naval modernization. In 2018, a $1 billion deal was struck for the purchasing of Turkish corvettes. What has been India's response? In 2023, when there was an earthquake in Turkey, India sent aid. But what did Turkey do? In return, when there was a conflict between India and Pakistan, it supported Pakistan and sold drones to Pakistan. So India has formed the counter alliances also. For example, India, rather than supporting the Turkish Cyprus, it backs the Republic of Cyprus. We have ties with Armenia to counter the Turkey-Pakistan-Azerbaijan axis. We have global alignments to contain Pakistan. For example, Pakistan is not there in the US Indo-Pacific Strategy 2022. And we have the infrastructure library also. For example, India's India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor bypasses Turkey, and for that only Turkey is promoting the Iraq development road as an alternative. Now, what has been the response of India after the India-Pakistan conflict? One, we are advocating for the economic nationalism, as endorsed by the Vice President also, that we should go for the economic measures for countering the countries who are against us. We went for the trade measures, for example, the banning of certain imports, the bans on the import of apple, marbles, etc. We cancelled the contracts with the Turkish firms like the Celebi ground handling. We also controlled the tourist outflows from India to Turkey. For example, certain companies like Ease My Trip, Cox and Kings, they suspended all the travel packages to Turkey. When we look at Azerbaijan, the reason is significant for us because it has access to the oil and natural gas. The oil and natural gas in the Caspian Sea region, it is near the Caspian Sea region, and it also sent the condolence message after the Pahalgam terror attack happened in India, and it is also the part of the international north-south transport corridor. Now, the next article is related to the Earth Observation Satellite. This is important in GS3 under the topic Achievement of Indians in Science and Technology, Indigenization of Technology and Developing New Technology. First, let's understand how do the Earth Observation Satellites work. They collect the particles of light. They are turned into a digital signal. This signal is sent to the ground. The antennas on the ground, they receive the data. The data is in the binary code. It is sent to a processing center where the binary code that is using only 0 and 1, it is arranged in the 8-character strings, and the computers transform the code into pixels. The pixels in a black and white image. Then the color is assigned to the light which is collected by the satellite based on the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum the data is representing, and thus the imagery is generated using the data which was sent from the Earth Observation Satellite. Now coming to the EOS 9, it will be launched upon the PSLV C61, which will be the 63rd mission of the PSLV, and it will be complementing and supplementing the data from ResourceSat, Cartosat and ReSat 2B series satellites. The new satellite carries the fuel for the post-mission deorbiting also, ensuring that it decays in 2 years and it will leave no debris. Where will the satellite be used? It will be used for the agriculture and forestry monitoring, for urban and infrastructure planning, for disaster management as well as national security surveillance. The mission life for this will be 5 years. The functions will be all-weather high-resolution imaging of the Earth's surface from across the country's vast territory. Now let's also have a look at some of the upcoming Earth observation missions. We'll be launching the next generation ResourceSat, which will provide us the wide swathe imaging with improved spatial resolution. The ReSat 1B series constellation, which will provide the all-weather day and night imaging. The GSat 1R providing the high resolution imaging from geo-orbit, etc. Now, the next article is related to cyberbullying. This is important in GS3 under the topic Challenges to Internal Security through Communications Network, the role of media and social networking sites in internal security challenges and the basics of cyber security. There have been some recent cases of the cyberbullying, the online abuses. One of the cases was the cyberbullying of Himanshi Narwal, the widow of the martyr Lieutenant Vinay Narwal. She was trolled for pleading for peace after the Pahalgam terror attack. Even her loyalty was questioned. Likewise, there was even the cyberbullying of the Foreign Secretary Vikram Mishri, especially after the announcement of the ceasefire. Even his daughter was threatened. So what are the regulatory loopholes regarding cyberbullying? Why does it happen in India? One, there is no dedicated law against the online hate speech, against the trolling on the web. There is a partial coverage which is done under the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. For example, section 74 provides the punishment for outraging of modesty of a woman, the section 75 for sexual harassment, the section 351 for criminal intimidation, 356 for defamation, 196 for promoting of enmity. Plus, there is a partial coverage under the Information Technology Act 2000 also. For example, section 66C for punishing the identity theft, 66D for impersonation, and section 67 of the IT Act for publishing obscene content. But there are gaps even in these regulatory provisions also. For example, there is no provision for sustained non-obscene abuse. And the stalking laws, they are usually gender specific, that is, men targeting women are punished. And there is insufficient coverage for the anonymous mob harassment. There are content moderation challenges also, how we can ensure that there is no cyberbullying. There are platform self-regulation failures. For example, the Telegram CEO himself was arrested in France for inadequate moderation of illegal content. X, or formerly known as Twitter, has been accused of amplifying hate speech, that is anti-Muslim narratives, in the UK. Section 69A of the IT Act allows the content blocking for national security purposes for ensuring public order, but it lacks transparency. For example, X has filed a lawsuit which challenges the government's use of Section 79 subclause 3 subclause B for takedowns without the due process of law. There are enforcement and justice barriers also. There is weak enforcement. For example, the government directives are prioritized over the individual complaints. The gendered abuse survivors, they face institutional disbelief, rather the blame from the side of institutions themselves. There are systemic issues also. For example, the perpetrator is usually anonymous. There are cross-jurisdictional hurdles, the perpetrators sitting abroad or in different jurisdictions, and limited police training also. So what can we recommend? We can ensure that there are dedicated laws, the anti-trolling, the hate speech laws, and we can strengthen the enforcement of the laws. For that, we need to train the law enforcement agencies, we need to streamline the reporting mechanisms, and the moderation should be transparent. For example, we can balance the section 69A with the Supreme Court's directions under the Shreya Singhal case, where the court had observed that the blocking orders should be given along with cogent reasons so that the judiciary can scrutinize whether the blocking order is legal or illegal. Thank you.